All right, Mikhail Kasyanov is the former prime minister of Russia, and he served for a short time under President Putin. And then I have to think, actually, it wasn't short at all. It was 4 years, which I think under any political career in the administration of Russia is a long time, but it is relatively short compared to the lengthy time that President Putin has stayed in the Kremlin, 22 years going on 23 years. Mikhail, welcome. You know, I thought back to the time of covering you when you were running for opposition, when you were trying to warn Russians about the dangers of canceling the Constitution, suspending presidential elections, of President Putin clinging on to power and where it could take the country. And I'll tell you, I mean, if we don't know now how dangerous it has become, we'll never know, because we are now seeing the result of Putin staying in office, staying in the presidency way too long.
Right. And that time, you're absolutely right. And that time, that was already clear for me in 2007, 2008, that Putin just changed the all perception of Russian policy, and Russia started to move in the wrong direction. And that's at that time, just I wanted to knock a little bit to people's doors and to let them understand that we could lose Russia. But even at that time, I couldn't even predict, couldn't even imagine where we would come. And in fact, just now situation is absolutely, I would say, dangerous for the country. Dangerous for outside world. That's what we see. This is criminal war which Mr. Putin just pursues right now, but it is dangerous for Russians. Putin already, I would say, insulted. I would say, already created big problems for generations ahead. That's unfortunately that's the reality for us, and I don't know just how to explain why Putin changed that way. Of course, it was completely different Putin in my time. And now that is absolutely, I would say, outrageous and absolutely unacceptable person, and his behavior, of course, should not be forgotten, and his deeds should be considered very seriously, very thoroughly, and Russia should somehow just get better health in the future, I believe. But right now,
you're obviously upset about it. I mean, this is not some clinical economic discussion. This is your country.
Yeah, I couldn't imagine that. That's what I'm saying. Absolutely upset, because just it was difficult to imagine that development. Of course, it was difficult to imagine what happened in 2014, annexation of Crimea and the war in Donbass. And that time, it was absolutely difficult to even to imagine that my friend and political collaborator Boris Nemtsov would be killed a year after our demonstrations against annexation, and just Navalny was poisoned and put in jail. That was absolutely step by step. But unfortunately, I'm very much disappointed that Russians cannot and the previous times could not react appropriately. And our demonstrations in 2011, 2012, we had a chance, but unfortunately, Russian people didn't take this chance and didn't get those changes which we could be achieved at that time. But unfortunately, right now, that already impossible for Russians to demonstrate, to have demonstrations on the street and to fight against this regime.
All right, Mikhail Kasyanov is somewhere in Europe. We're not going to ask you where, because people actually have to be, expat Russians have to be worried about their safety and their security. I assume you cannot go back. And what are your conversations with fellow Russians that have left Russia, in disgust over the war, but are stranded somewhere in Europe, wondering what's the future of the country, and will they ever be able to go back?
I would say the mood is absolutely negative. Mostly just I'm talking from time to time, even my friends, business people coming from Russia and coming back, because just they have their businesses, they cannot just drop everything there. And in fact, the mood is very, very negative. They now just realize that they lost the chances. They didn't, many Russians, educated people in big cities, they didn't expect, they didn't use elections in an appropriate manner when it was a possibility, but it was a possibility in 2008, for instance. And now just they understand that they lost this chance. They have very negative mood for their families. But those who decided to leave Russia, of course, also just facing problems because just they live in different countries. They cannot prepare just the whole foundation for them for living for their families. It's difficult. They're facing with the problems, although they, I would say, welcome in many countries, but still it's a problem because they lost their homes, they lost their jobs, they lost their businesses, they lost their assets, etc.
Is there political dissent? Are there people who gather, not a government in exile, and most governments in exile don't do very well anyway, but are there people who say we have to start planning for the future, that we have to think about going back eventually and returning Russia to a democracy, and what happens to the country after the death of President Putin? Or is that just a distant dream right now?
Yes, absolutely. Just of course, in the West, there is I would say a tendency or discussion that Russians are irredeemable, so that they couldn't be changed, etc. They have some kind of expansionism, militarism, and some kind of imperialism in their DNA. But I think that's absolutely wrong perception. And in fact, just as we see in the history in many European countries, you'll see that all of them faced with the problems of, say, fascism. Right now, just Putin's regime behaved like a classical Mussolini regime, fascist regime. But all those countries, including Italy, Spain, Greece, Portugal, they faced with such problems. And all people supported those regimes in their times. I'm not saying about Germany, but all those countries, all those people of all those countries, nations, overcame these problems, and they got a chance. And I'm sure that Russians will also should be given a chance to reconsider, to rethink just everything, and what happened with our country and with our nation. And Russians should get a chance to build up democracy, to build a democratic state. I think we will definitely could have such a chance, and we will get it, and we'll start immediately after just I would say collapse of Putin's regime and transformation of the country.
Do you think the collapse is coming? I mean, the war seems to be escalating. This week we have drone attacks by the Ukrainians inside Russia, and deep inside Russia. I mean, one of them at an air base 150 miles away from Moscow. So the Ukrainians are gaining the ability to take the fight to Russia itself. Do you think that the regime is in any kind of danger, or do you think Putin is just dug in deeper and more steadfast in his determination to annex parts of Ukraine, maybe take the whole country if he can?
I think just that's already clear, and it is the whole situation. The war goes on a say predictable way, and I think just we definitely all believe that there will be Ukrainian victory and Putin will be defeated. That's definitely the case. The issue is when, and as we see, just those effective military support and financial support of Ukraine by the Western governments, that gives the opportunity and hope for Ukrainian people to win this battle, this war. And in fact, the military potential is growing, and there is some kind of leveling up of these military potentials. Of course, Putin has quantity, huge quantities, but quality of equipment Ukrainians have right now just already to some extent just equal or even somewhere higher. And in fact, I think just we have a turning point. Maybe next month, in 1 month, in 2 months, and just there will be another offensive operations of Ukraine. There will be a liberation of their territories, and definitely there will be the case. And the Putin already just creating some kind of fanatism, and in fact he looks like fanatic already, and some kind of hysteria around him. And what they're doing, just destroying civilian infrastructure of Ukraine instead of just having military offensive operations just on Ukraine as they started in the beginning. Right now, completely different situation. They're defending those positions they managed to get, but of course there is no I would say change, and there is no hopes for Putin to win this war. That definitely already many Russians understand and realize that, and even including his inner circle. That's already among Putin's propagandists already just hysteria. They're on the Russian television, on the Russian propaganda television. They're already demonstrating their hysteria. They're saying every Russians, including those people, just every worker will be punished by the West. All of them will be in Hague and tribunal. They're saying just not them, not the generals and not political leaders, but they're saying already in television propaganda that every particular person, every Russian will be punished. That's what they're creating, I would say, some kind of danger, so that they realize they couldn't win, and they're saying just all Russians should step up and help Putin to win. That's already hysteria. And in fact, answering the question, I think in a few months will be turning point. And I believe that next year, Putin will be defeated.
You're an economist. Let me ask you an economic question. The sanctions have been rolling in, different sanctions slowly brought in by the EU and the United States. And now we have this price cap on Russian oil, which some people feel will have some impact. Others are quite critical of it, saying that the price of oil was falling anyway. Are sanctions and what the West is doing, are they exacting a toll in Russia, do you think? And do average Russians feel it? I don't seem to think that they do.
First, let me comment just whether the sanctions work and how they affect the economy. Of course, they do, and definitely just the additional decision on a price cap for oil. That's another strengthening of this effect of sanctions. Of course, it's not, I would say, a catastrophic effect for Putin's budget, but it is creating the decision creates problem. In fact, the budget designed for with the expectation oil price at 70. Right now, the cap is 60, and in fact, just all volumes to switch all those volumes which were sold in Europe to other directions, to other countries. It is difficult. Only 1/3 could be done. That's already done, because just many countries stopped purchase of Russian oil even several months before today, and that's what already just problems already a budget already feels this. In fact, this cap would create a lack of revenue, definitely, and the budget designed with the deficit of 3% of GDP, and in fact, this cap would increase this budget deficit for another 1 percentage point of GDP, and of course there is no sources of financing of this deficit. It means printing money. It means inflation, and Putin will have to cut expenditures of we can see just he will not cut military expenditures, but would cut for social sphere, for health, for education and others. It means just Russian people would continue be pressed by Putin's regime through this mechanism. And in fact, sanctions are felt by Russians, especially middle class in big cities. They already lost everything. Just they use in their everyday time just a lot of imported products what are on the shelves on the stores right now. Nothing of that. And in fact, Russians feel that completely different style of life, that completely different situation, and especially right now, just after and during the process of there is a danger for every man. And in fact, to be the danger to be mobilized and sent to the battlefield and to be killed.
And they are talking about new rounds of mobilization in the new year.
Yeah, that's already just being prepared. And in fact, they don't stop even this mobilization on their statements that everything already fulfilled, etc. Now, this process continues. And many thousands, dozens thousands of Russians already left Russia because of that, because they don't want to go and kill Ukrainians. They don't want to be killed, and that's why Putin losing just the whole, I would say, potential, economic, military, and man potential. He wanted to have manpower advantage on the battlefield, but he cannot do this. That's why just I'm saying, coming back, that the economic factor works on pressing the regime, and I think that next year we'll see the result. We'll see the end of this story, I hope.
And the end of the story is
collapse of regime. If Putin seen defeated, that's the whole structure, so-called vertical of power, would start diluting, and in fact, there will not be a one-day collapse, but that will be in few months. I think would be collapse of the regime and some kind of changes. Of course, it will not be democratic changes immediately. There will be some kind of Putin's successor who could guarantee and then keep the same, I would say, relations inside Russia. But such a regime will not last long, and that definitely and inevitably would lead to collapse of this replacement, and would lead to normal elections. I'd like to believe just normal democratic and international standards elections, but just any elections would be different. That will in any case, opposition to some extent would be already will be participating in these elections. It means changes will start.
Prime Minister Mikhail Kasyanov, always a pleasure to talk to you, and thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you very much, Dana.